The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. We are back once again for our 3 times a week news update, the Nerdcast News Report. This time it is for Wednesday, March the 12th, 2025. I am Matt in the studio. Great to have you along with us. We had our short, not quite a week hiatus, but we are back with some news headlines and kind of getting caught up on all the things that have happened while we were off for a few days, but looking forward to bringing you all the latest news and talking a little bit about the new Gundam movie, which we had a chance to see last night, and getting you caught up on everything else that's going on around the world of nerdy news. So really excited to bring that to you on this Wednesday morning. Joining me in studio, as always, is Mike. Mike, how's it going?
It's going. Yeah, a lot of news to cover. Been really amped for about a week now to talk about the Sekai Con and Ohayocon nonsense, but unfortunately, not able to do that until this morning, but looking forward to getting into that, talking Gundam and an excessive amount of anime awards. Yeah,
it's a chance to kind of get things reset a little bit after a few days off. I was spanning the globe of the Horizon League from Pittsburgh to Indianapolis over the past week or so with a short stop back home over the weekend, but excited to be back to talk some news, and like Mike said, we are going to start off, which obviously if you clicked on the link, you probably could kind of figure that out. We are going to start off with an update, if you will, on the lawsuit that CESI/Ohayocon filed against Sekai Guild and SekaiCon. Last week, there was a counterfiling posted in the Common Police Court in Hamilton County in response to Ohiocon's lawsuit. And you can find it, obviously, as we mentioned. All this stuff is public record. You can go onto Hamilton County's website. You can look up the court case, and you can find the documents. I won't post them here just to, make sure there's no information that might dock somebody or anything like that. But again, it's all public knowledge, so it's all out there. But the first half of the document is basically them going point by point through the original complaint and saying, yes, we agree with this. No, we don't agree with this. Or this is partially true.
There's not enough information to form a judgment, essentially.
Correct. So, that's, just standard procedure. The defense is basically going through and saying what they are willing to stand up and fight for, what they're not. There's really not evidence enough to have a thought about, or what they do concur. Because, some of the information in there is stuff that both parties would willingly say, yes, this is 100% true.
Yeah, general facts like, yeah, we worked with Ohayocon roughly around this time. We concede that.
Yeah, so all that stuff is basically the first half of the document. And then you get into the second half of the document, and that's kind of when things change. This is when the Sekai Guild people, the defendants in this case, basically kind of lay out their side of the story. This is exactly what we say happened. And, I'll let you kind of get more into it because I know you've gone through it even more than I have. But it's kind of the Cliff's Notes version of this section is they were basically considered themselves staff just because of the number of hours they were working. The number of hours they worked were in excess, in most cases, of 40 hours a week, which by law is supposed to guarantee you overtime, which obviously they were never paid. They were not paid in relationship to the amount of revenue that the convention brought in, despite...
To be fair, what is time and a half of $0 an hour?
True. That's exactly, and that's exactly what Ohayocon would come back and say. But for those, because they did mention that some of the staff members did get a 1099. Yeah. So, some of them got paid, but clearly insufficient to the number of hours they put in. At least that is their side of the case. And they're basically coming after Ohayocon for not only probably wages that they believe they were owed that were not paid, but also damage that they have done to SekaiCon because of this lawsuit, which they just flat out say they believe this is a retaliatory lawsuit that is meant to derail SekaiCon and the Sekai Guild. And they have asked for hundreds of thousands of dollars at minimum, because it says it could be in excess of, in damages if the jury, if the judge, whoever actually is the one that makes the judgment in this case, finds in favor of the defense, on top of legal fees and things like that. So this is basically them putting their flag in the ground and saying, here's what we think happened. Here's why we think this is a frivolous lawsuit, and this is why everything that Ohayocon has done up to this point has been with the sole purpose of defaming the people and the group SekaiCon and Sekai Guild, and we believe that they should be the ones that have to turn around and pay damages on top of potentially past wages and things like that. I'll be honest, I'm not a lawyer, and we don't, nothing that we say is legal advice or anything like that, or certainly, I would say not even 100% a legal opinion, but the one thing that, just as an outsider, it seems like the wage part will be a little harder to argue, because you're going to have to figure out and show the court calculable wages. Like, you really going to have your paperwork together and really going to have to be able to show that. Maybe they do. I don't know. That to me seems like the harder part. The second part of it, the defamation, the damages to the convention, the business relationships, to me, that seems like the part that could be pretty easy to prove. And if that ends up being the case, Ohayocon and the parties involved, who are already well in debt, are going to be farther in debt, because they're going to owe thousands of dollars at least to Sekai Guild. Again, I know you went through the whole thing even more thoroughly than I have. Your general impressions as you read through this, and kind of things you can add to that.
Yeah, and I think the other kind of takeaway as far as what they're alleging is that all the damage that Ohayocon has suffered to themselves was self-inflicted. That as far as their reputation and the failures of Ohayocon 24 and 25 are solely because of their ineptitude and inability to effectively run a convention and even facilitate like the relationships required to do that. But as I read through it, they mentioned that they did start out as volunteers, but as the convention grew and became more lucrative, the labor became way more intensive, and the volunteers no longer considered their positions volunteer positions. I think there's something to be said for that, because a lot of these people were given these like prestigious titles as far as head of marketing, convention director. They were referred to as senior staff. Once you start throwing around terms like that, you're talking about employees. You're
Correct.
not talking about volunteers.
Yeah.
You don't go and volunteer any random place and they're like, oh, hey, you're the vice president now. You're not getting paid and you can leave whenever you want, but you're the vice president. No, that never happens.
I think if you're going to do that, then nobody better be making any money off of it. The whole thing better be a volunteer effort if you're going to expect people to be senior staff, to be vice presidents of something, and the person at the top is not only trying to make revenue, but is a for-profit organization making revenue to basically sustain their living.
Yeah. They mentioned that some of the tasks that they performed included IT support, organizing vendors throughout the year, managing payment for the conference, recruiting attendees, managing volunteers, booking accommodations, and, quote, otherwise keep the gears of a 10,000 plus attendee conference turning. I think once you're managing people, it's really tough to be labeled a volunteer, because that's a level of responsibility that I don't think you do for free.
No.
They also claimed that they spent combined no less than 1,000 hours planning the convention. For reference, that's as long as it takes the Aqua Teen Hunger Force to travel from the mall back to their lab. So that's a long time. That's a lot of hours. They had mentioned the week of the convention and the week before, they would typically work like 60 plus hour weeks. Like that is not something any sane person does as a volunteer, I don't think. They also mentioned that they didn't sign any kind of confidentiality or non-compete agreements with Ohayocon. They also contended that they were the ones who operated their personal social media accounts, which were used to help Ohayocon, but were never Ohayocon's property. And I think that specifically kind of ties into what the status of their Discord is, where that was clearly not Ohayocon's initially, was retrofitted to be Ohayocons when it served the volunteers, and now, as they would say, no longer needs to be Ohayocon. They mentioned that Ohayocon never bothered to create their own promotional infrastructure and instead are trying to basically steal it from Sekai Guild at this point through this lawsuit. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out because I'm kind of of the belief that, yeah, kind of getting those back wages that they think they're owed, that's probably going to be difficult, but it's hard to argue that the amount of time that they haven't been able to operate working towards Sekai Con because of the original restraining order, that generates real damages. Mm-hmm. I think that, to me, that's the only thing I can look at and say, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You add legal fees on top of that. Like, if anyone's getting a payout, I kind of get the feeling it might be Sekai Con because of the restraining order and legal fees.
Well, and to go back to the wages thing, one thing that is going to happen, and it's already happened, like, Ohayocon has already made the claims on their revenue, but they're going to have to back those claims up. There's going to have to be tax returns. There's going to have to be profit and loss statements from the convention during that time to kind of show like who was being paid, what were they being paid. All that stuff should be documented if you are a for-profit business. So that's where, if there is going to be any kind of back wages, that's where you're going to figure that out, is that, hey, there's these people who are senior staff who are making a salary, and then there are these people who are also a senior staff who had as much, if not more, responsibility, who got nothing, or a penance, a hotel room, a badge. Like, that's when they could look at it and say, okay, you did violate wage and hour laws, and that's where the whole overtime thing comes in. Like, if you can prove that you worked all these hours and you were being paid something, but you weren't paid overtime, those people take that stuff seriously, and that's when you can get into major problems. So that'll be interesting to kind of see how that shakes out. But yeah, it's hard not to look at that and just say, man, it's exactly what I thought was going to come out. I don't think there were any surprises in this. And again, if everybody's a volunteer, if it truly is a nonprofit, if nobody's making $1 off of this, and you want to have people in these roles, that's different because everybody has the same expectations, that you really are doing it for the love of the game at that point.
Yeah.
And that's, somebody wants to spend 60 hours a week for the love of the game, knock yourself out. That's great. But it's not for the love of the game anymore when the people at the top are making profit off of this and revenue and generating income, and you're not. Like, that's where it's like, okay, this is now a problem.
You can't open up a car parts factory and be like, well, everyone's volunteering. I'm bringing in a salary here, but everyone else is just doing all the grunt work for free.
Yeah, that's actually very illegal.
Yeah, and I like the idea that Sekai Guild is kind of painting Ohayocon as just being inept and unable to do their job right, because you can also look at that as far as their decision to run a convention in 2025, where I imagine fairly early on they knew they were going to lose a substantial amount of money, yet they moved forward with it. I think, to me, that further points to, hey, these guys clearly don't know what they're doing. That's why their convention is in the shape it's in now. We did our best to keep it running as long as we could. Once we felt that we weren't being heard and that things weren't going to improve, we walked away, and there's the result.
And the bottom line is, if you are running any kind of event and you have people that are doing all the things that the Sekai Guild people were doing, you had best keep those people happy.
Yeah.
Because they are the ones that are actually keeping the convention running. And if they're coming to you and saying, hey, there are problems, we need to actually sit down and talk about this, because everybody wants to, especially people who are pro Ohayocon, not that there are a ton, but they want to kind of throw the whole strike thing back in their face and say, oh, you couldn't strike, you're not. Yeah, I mean, it was semantics at the end of the day. Like, maybe it wasn't a strike. Maybe, they weren't crossing a picket line or anything like it. You think it's in traditional, but it was the concept of it more than the actual practice. And I feel like, what they were saying at that point was, hey, we've tried to talk to you. We've tried to sit down and be reasonable and tell you, like, hey, these things are a problem. Hey, this logo that is violating the Geneva Convention needs to change. Hey, all these things that they tried to do behind closed doors that clearly weren't going to change. I mean, you could see that the moment that Ohayocon ran their own convention this year and all the decisions they ended up making that were, not good decisions that clearly they were trying, they tried to talk her out of over all these years.
I think clearly this has been brewing for a while because no healthy relationship could end because you can't agree on a logo for your anime convention.
Yeah.
And I think I'm not a huge fan of the Sakura logo. It's not, I think it's obviously better than the Red Cross logo, obviously.
For legal purposes.
Yeah, and I just think under normal circumstances, you're able to sit down with everyone who has a stake, whether it's monetarily or hours worked, and say, let's agree on something. Like, this shouldn't be that difficult. And the second that logo was proposed, was turned down by Melissa, and then forcibly used by the volunteers, I think you're just saying this probably should have blown up and ended years ago.
Yeah, it was clearly a bad marriage that maybe there was some effort in saving, but probably was beyond saving at that point.
Yeah.
But as with marriages, when there's money involved, then they become the dissolution of those things become more complicated. And in this case, just like a lot of marriages, it ended up in court. And like I said, I'm not a legal expert. We have, as I make clear every time we talk about this story, we have done our best, even though from an emotional standpoint, it's very easy to get behind the Sekai Guild people and very hard to get behind the Ohayocon people. We also want to do our best as a news organization, for lack of a better thing to say we are, of trying to present the facts as we see them, as they are, and then letting the listener kind of form their own opinion. From an opinion standpoint, it's really hard to see Ohayocon coming out of this. And I said really from the beginning, even before this response, if their attorney is smart, they're immediately going to try to settle this out of court before it goes to court. And you have discovery, and you have to open your books, and you have to do all this stuff. And from an Ohayocon standpoint, if I was rooting for them, or lack of a better way to say it, my biggest fear is that they may be so incompetent that a lot of the proof that they would have might not be available. They might not have kept the records that they needed to keep. And without that, they're really going to be in trouble. I still think, and maybe even after this statement comes out, that if I'm an attorney and I'm not just concerned about billable hours, I would be like, hey, you really should still try to settle this out of court, because I don't think this is going to go well for you if this goes to trial.
Yeah, I would agree. And my concern, to your point, as far as them retaining the records they need, is my concern is that they probably pawn that off on some volunteer to be responsible for.
Yeah.
Which I guess further complicates the trial itself. But I think the other thing to consider when you compare this to a marriage is that I think both sides have to be worried that the kids don't just decide to go to Animate Columbus, and make that their new parent.
Yeah.
Or GalaxyCon. Or I think what I've seen from the Sekai Guild is that they're certainly interested in bringing in more people into the community. We've seen that with their Anime Day events. I'm not sure Ohayocon has the work ethic or interest in kind of hitting the streets and trying to rebuild any kind of community.
Well, and to be fair, they bring in this new con chair, an assistant con chair, and they started off seemingly on the right foot as far as like, we're going to get out here, we're going to have these regular meetings, we're going to try to communicate. They may have been a couple of guys that have given the opportunity, could have been like, hey, let's do community outreach. Let's do a press tour. Let's try to rehabilitate the Ohayocon name before it's too late. And at some point, pretty quickly after they took over, that plan changed. Whether they, because somebody was legal advice was telling them like, hey, you got a case with this lawsuit. So now it's like, well, we're not going to do any of that stuff now. Now we're just going to go ahead and put on a convention, go full steam ahead, and we'll sue Sekai Guild, and hopefully we'll win all this money back, and then the con can just go on. Because that's the other thing. Let's say Ohayocon wins, which I don't think they will, but let's say they win. What kind of goodwill is left in the anime community in Ohio if you basically drive this other convention out of business for stuff that most anime convention goers could see as items that you would learn by visiting any other convention. Nothing that's proprietary to Ohayocon is being used to run SekaiCon. Like, I can't imagine the average anime fan isn't going to be like, I don't want anything to do with Ohayocon after this.
Yeah, they have to be worried that they've long since lost in the court of public opinion. And you saw that with the turnout and the money they lost, both in 24 and 25. I just... going the legal route, and unfortunately, you mentioned the new con chair, having that Zoom call and kind of starting out like, hey, we're going to be super transparent, we're going to talk to you guys. Not only did they stop doing any of that, but they started deleting comments, they started limiting comments, some of their guests started attacking people who had legitimate gripes against the convention. I just think if you were trying to just obliterate your convention in the most efficient way possible, I kind of feel like they did that.
Yeah, for sure. And it's hard to imagine the con coming back after this, but we'll see. But obviously, we were kind of waiting for this to drop. And of course, it drops right at the one time that we don't have a podcast every other day. But obviously, I saw there was another filing where they're giving one of the defendants a few more weeks to respond to something. So
a lot of people to have to wrangle to get information from.
So my guess is we're still several weeks away from actually getting to the crux of this, but we'll keep an eye on the filings, and if anything else newsworthy pops up, we'll certainly bring it to the podcast. But it's going to be a messy spring and summer, I have a feeling, as this appears destined to end up going to court, which is, like I said, I don't know if that's the best plan for Ohiocon's side, but we'll see how it goes. Let's move on to more positive, enjoyable topics. And we've talked a lot about the new Gundam movie, GQuuuuuX Beginning. Last night, we had the chance to go see it up in the Fairfield Commons area. And it was pretty good. Like, it was the two of us and one other person in the theater. It was certainly not well attended, although the whole movie theater was kind of empty.
Yeah.
And we'll talk more about the movie-going experience here in a moment, but I just posted this article just to kind of, give us something to talk about. The fact that, it continues to earn well over $1 million now, and we'll talk a little bit more about the Japanese earnings coming up in the Empire Express. But, I have not watched as much of the original Gundam, certainly not as much as you have, but without getting too spoilerific, because you really should go see it, especially if you're planning on watching the TV series. And I still don't know if they're going to show the movie as part of the TV series as well. But having a base knowledge of the original Gundam certainly will help you kind of through the first 30 or so minutes of the movie that are very much, I don't want to say just... It's not a shot-for-shot remake of the first episode of Mobile Suit Gundam, but it is certainly an homage in a lot of ways. A lot of it is pulled right from that, and then after the first 30 minutes or so, we get to the new characters and the plot of the movie, which is going to be the plot of the TV series. But overall, I really enjoyed it. Like I said, I know of the characters of the original Mobile Suit Gundam, so I have kind of that base knowledge, and I thought it was a lot of fun and really excited to kind of see where it goes. You have much more of a knowledge of the original Mobile Suit Gundam than I do. Your general thoughts on the movie after seeing it last night?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I think, having a certain knowledge of the original Mobile Suit Gundam certainly helps, because the first 15 to 20 minutes is basically just the first episode of Mobile Suit Gundam as far as the narration to tell you, to kind of set the stage of the world, like the Zaku's infiltrating Side 7 to kind of get a glimpse of the Federation base there, and that's where they find the Gundam. Obviously, originally in Mobile Suit Gundam, you have Amuro at the scene there and his classmates or whatever, and he ultimately ends up piloting the mobile suit. And obviously, because this is an alternate reality, that doesn't happen this time around, and we end up in a situation where you find a future world kind of run by Zeon. And it was really cool, because obviously the homage to the original was really, really awesome. It'll be interesting. Like, it's funny, as we're watching it, they reintroduced Chalia Bull, who I couldn't remember very well, and I realize why now, because in the original Mobile Suit Gundam, he's not introduced until episode 39.
Oh.
So there's like 5 episodes left by the time you meet this guy. That's why his name didn't ring a bell as much as like Makuve or Cassilia or any of the zombies, honestly. But
it's clear he's going to be very important to this story.
Yeah, it's kind of convenient how it works out that you had this character. You know, there are certainly bigger characters in the original Mobile Suit Gundam, but this guy being a new type and kind of being introduced near the end of the original Mobile Suit Gundam kind of made him like the perfect candidate to be the guy in GQuuuuuX. So that's kind of interesting. But yeah, I feel like this could maybe lead to them potentially just remaking the original Gundam, and if they do, obviously, I hope they go with a more traditional style for the mobile suits. I like the new designs, but they're very not Gundam,
very Evangelion feeling, which obviously the tie-in with the Evangelion is understandable given the director of this. But yeah, it definitely looks like they're piloting Eva and not Gundam, but they're really cool looking.
Yeah.
So they're
very not like. Trying to think of the best way to describe, because when you think of traditional Gundam, you think very like linear, boxy shaped things, not as like humanoidal, I guess, maybe, for lack of a better way to explain it.
Yeah.
There's something just kind of sinister about the new models.
Yeah, which, I mean, maybe that's just the feeling from having watched Ava that's like something bad is. There's more to them that meets the eye, if you will, borrowing from another robot franchise. But
you kind of get some G Gundam vibes from this because they have the whole clan battle thing going on. It kind of makes you think of the Gundam fights from G Gundam.
And the Zero system.
Yeah, and turns out being a new type isn't good enough anymore. You need something else to potentially make you go insane and see whatever they saw that seems to be an important plot point to the show. So, yeah, I wasn't sure how far into what's going to be the show this movie was going to get into, but I think it gave you a good taste. You got to meet the characters, and it'll be interesting to see how the world responds, and also what other cameos or appearances you'll see from Mobile Suit Gundam characters that we haven't found out about yet.
Yeah, it does feel like it's a setup for a lot of different directions. You could go with more of a G Gundam type show where it is more about the battles, like almost recreationally, than it is about a war. But it also feels like, because the peace is very tenuous at the beginning of this, because of the way it kind of all shook out, it feels like a war could be easily started. And you even got hints there at the end of the movie that's like, there are a lot of people that are not really trusting at this point, and it feels like one wrong move by somebody, whether intentional or unintentional, could kind of set the whole thing off again. So like I said, I really liked it. It was great to see it in the theater. We don't go to the movies very often, so it was kind of cool to see it on the big screen. And I think if you get the chance, if it's still showing in your area, you should definitely take advantage of that.
Yeah, I feel like movie theaters are probably still struggling quite a bit, but it is still a great experience, especially when you're watching something like a Gundam show, because the battles just feel larger than life on the big screen.
They do, for sure. Now, if you are going to the movies, be prepared to watch some ads. I threw this in the title of the headline thing. We went to see the ads and a movie broke out. Felt very much like that. I had just read an article a couple weeks ago talking about that there were a lot of complaints about the number of advertising spots that would air before a movie. Even having read that, I was not prepared for... And we got there, admittedly, about 5 minutes before showtime after the ticket machine ate your tickets, and we had to go through that. And, of course, there are very few human beings actually working there.
Clearly it didn't matter that it didn't print out the tickets, but whatever.
Yeah, we could have literally just walked into the theater and nobody would have said anything. But it was, a good, solid 15 minutes of... I mean, there were a handful of trailers right at the very end, but... It was
then another commercial or two.
And then another commercial or two that was thrown in. And we're talking, like you had mentioned last night, it used to be you would get commercials for like, Joe's drive-through down the road, like, or something that was local to the theater where it's like you're trying to get business to kind of support other area business. And it's like, okay, that's fine. this was like big national ads that ran, Progressive and Pepsi, and it was just a barrage of advertising. It's like, man, I paid, or you paid like $14 for this ticket. I've already paid. Like, I'm coming in. I mean, I'm okay with a couple of ads, but it was a solid 15 minutes of advertisement before we ever got around to the trailers and then the movie. Like,
and that's probably the interesting part, is like you expect a certain amount of ads before showtime, but once showtime hits, you expect the show. And clearly it was, the movie's going to start at 8:40. So be there at 8:40 so you can watch 10 more minutes of commercials.
Yeah. And then we're going to show you trailers that are also going to have commercials in them. Like,
I think that's just where we are, though. I think that's how these theaters survive.
And I get that, and I try to be cognizant of that because I don't want theaters to go away. I think that would be bad. I think there really is something to seeing these movies on the big screen.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, you are struggling to get people in the door, stop that. Like, try to back off. Let's have let's be reasonable. And I also think, to some degree, when you advertise that the show starts at 8:40, I expect to be watching trailers at 8:40, not at 8:50.
Well, I think the next closest comparison is a television show. Like, if a television show starts at 8 p.m., the show starts at 8 p.m.
Yeah.
There might be 8 minutes, and then there's commercials, but you at least get the show started.
Yeah, and my fear is that at some point they're going to start putting ads in the movie.
Yeah, it's an ad break right in the middle of it.
Yeah, which, for anime, you could probably make it work, but
I think you can only go so far until the theater experience is no longer worth it.
Yeah.
I can live with additional ads before the movie starts, but I think once the movie starts, there's probably going to be enough product placement in the movie itself to serve as advertising. I don't think I need to see ad breaks in the middle.
No, it's a little out of hand, and now that it's starting to end up in stories with people talking about it, I have a feeling that maybe it'll get better. We'll see, but nothing major there. Just wanted to mention it and give you a heads up if you haven't been to the movies in a while like we hadn't. Expect that. Really quickly, and I don't want to go too in-depth on this because we're kind of over time already anyway, but I just wanted to kind of throw this in. The subreddit r/anime had their anime awards. I'm actually going to post a link to these in the chat so you can kind of check these out in detail. The one thing that really jumped out at me is that, just like with AMV contests that we've been to over the years, the public's winner and the judges' winners are, in a lot of cases, very different. I don't understand why that is, but
what I didn't see was who makes up the jury. Is that just the Reddit mods? Because if so, I would understand they would have terrible opinions.
Yeah,
the Reddit mods.
Very true, very true. But you can go through all the awards, and there's a lot of good stuff. Good to see Yuta Camp winning on both accounts. That was just a really great slice of life show, and the Apothecary Diaries winning there, and Suspense. But what jumped out at you before we jump onto the Empire Express and when you look through these awards?
Yeah, it's definitely the disagreement between the jury and the public. Something like in the action category, the public voted Solo Leveling number 2, and the jury had it at number 10. Solo Leveling is one of the biggest shows of the year. It's crazy to me that it wouldn't have been higher with the jury. I didn't see Dandadan, which, I knew was going to be huge, but it's hard for me to imagine watching it and thinking it's better than Solo Leveling. The other big takeaway is I don't watch a lot of the highly acclaimed shows, clearly. Like Adventure, I had Shangri-La Frontier that I watched. Let's see. Comedy, I didn't have any because I've yet to watch Spy Family Code White. I've watched the show, but I've not watched it yet. So, I was kind of glad to see Girls Band Cry do as well as it did. I'm a little surprised that the character from it scored pretty highly on like the top character because I thought she was the worst part of the show. But the open's really good. And it was on the list. To me, I take away that my opinion seems to be a little closer to the public than the jury, and I guess I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and that's probably normal in most cases. And the other takeaway, Dungeon Meshi was obviously very popular with the jury. Like that won a bunch of awards on the jury side, and I mean, I'm sure it's fine, but it's not really a show I was real familiar with. But I know the opening theme, I think was pretty catchy. But
Yeah.
yeah, so check those out. See where your opinions line up, or if you're just looking for a new show to watch from 2024 that you missed out on, it might be a good way to kind of take a look and grab something that might appeal to you as you go through those awards. Ready to wrap this up with the Empire Express?
Let's do it.
Let's wrap this up with our final segment of the podcast. I know you're not a coffee drinker, but maybe this will change your mind. Gwar has gotten into the coffee game as they have introduced Berserker Mode coffee. What do you think of the idea?
Yeah, just add this to the ever-growing list of licensed products offered from your favorite bands. I did see where Gwar actually already had another coffee brand through Grindcore Coffee Company called Espresso Destructo, but I'm not really interested in trying that one either. If I was going to pick a coffee from a metal artist to try, it would probably have to be, just due to the name, David Ellefson's Roast in Peace.
Yes, indeed.
I mean, genius.
That is pretty great.
The seeds to the potential WrestleMania Night 1 main event were planted on Raw on Monday when Roman Reigns returned, helped Seth Rollins win his cage match against CM Punk, and then decimated both of them. It has to be the main event of Night 1, right?
It does, and I feel bad for some other matches that they're actually doing a really good job in building, and I feel like in other years probably would have that shot, but honestly, as I said off the air the other day, if Cody were fighting anybody else, this match would have a chance to main event Night 2 because you've got three of the biggest stars generationally in WWE, but Cody and Cena will be Night 2. This will be Night 1. After 18 years, the One Piece dub has finally caught up to the original Japanese. This was confirmed after Toei Animation announced dubbed episodes 1109 through 1122 will debut on Crunchyroll on March 18th. It's pretty impressive considering this is actually the second attempt at dubbing the show in the U.S., isn't it?
Yeah, since they kept going with it, it was bound to happen sooner or later that they would catch up. I assume this also means that One Piece is profitable enough over here to warrant continuing the dub, which is really awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I did the math, and based on my current anime episodes per day count, if I wanted to catch up on One Piece starting at episode 1, I would be caught up in 332 days.
So you can do it in less than a year, no problem.
Easy enough. In more Gundam GQuuuuuX news, the series has surpassed 3 billion yen at the Japanese box office, more than $20 million. They also announced the show will stream worldwide on Amazon Prime Video. Are you a little surprised this didn't end up on Crunchyroll?
Yeah, a little bit. I feel like the Crunchyroll has had a lot of the Gundam shows, and this is a little bit of a shock to go with Amazon Prime Video, but at least it's on a service that I already have because I have Amazon Prime. It's not on some new streaming service that I have to subscribe to, so that's good. But yeah, obviously the movie's doing really well, and I have a feeling the TV series is going to be a big hit. And finally, in what is certain to be the second greatest anime adaptation of America's favorite sport, it was announced this week that Turkey, the anime bowling series, will debut in July 2025. Feels like that's long overdue, right?
Yeah, just by the title, I would have had no idea that this was about bowling. But I had to do some research, and I looked it up, and it looks like they got pretty much all the high school bowler stereotypes covered. You have the main character's Mai, who looks ordinary, but has a natural talent for bowling and bowls left-handed. Rina, who's a first year who's harsh towards Mai, but admires her more than anyone. Sayuri, who has a complex about her large size and uses a 16-pound ball. Nozomi, who's a second-year student, dreams of becoming a top model and appears in teen magazines. And Nikaido, a second-year science-oriented girl who has a dangerous side and bowls two-handed. So everything you could possibly want in bowling.
All I can think of is he was doing the 16-pound ball joke all wrong. Oh, with that note, it is time to wrap up this edition of the Nerdcast News Report. Great to be back with you once again after our short hiatus. And we'll be back on Friday, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, as we get you set for the weekend with all the nerdy news you'll need to know heading into your weekend. Don't forget, we'll be back for the Hard Rock Empire Sunday night at 7, back in our normal start time, as we'll be talking the music of February the 28th coming up this week as we wrap up the month of February in the Hard Rock Empire. Big thanks to everyone for joining us. Big thanks to our crew. Big thanks to Mike for joining me in the studio this morning. A big thanks to you for listening whenever and wherever you happen to be listening to the Nerdcast News Report. But that's going to wrap things up. For Mike and the entire crew, I'm Matt saying so long. Don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.